Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. My guest for this week's episode is James Lanthier from Mindset Pharma, a company based out of Toronto that is looking to develop novel psychedelic compounds that are related to known psychedelic compounds, but are more efficient, more specifically directed towards specific ailments that they're looking to treat, and they're looking to make improvements on the natural compounds. And so we have a discussion about what that is all about. This interview is actually recorded all the way back in May 9th, so I've been holding on to it for a while because I've had a backlog of interviews, and I am currently in the process of building up my next backlog of interviews, so I'm getting lots of interviews in, and partly this is because I'm taking some time off in August to do some travel with my family, but also just to get everything loaded up and ready to go so it's all there when I need it. Before we get into the conversation with James, of course, just a few quick announcements first. This week, thanks to Sadek for making a small contribution in support of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast via PayPal. Thank you very much, Sadek. Also, would like to thank Wes, who he's kind of a double supporter. Wes is great. He has both a monthly PayPal contribution that he has set up that he makes in support of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast, and he is also a patron over at my Patreon page and makes a monthly contribution over there. Thank you very much, Wes. Really appreciate your continued and ongoing support, and I know that your situation changes a lot, but you like to throw some support my way when you're able to, so thank you very much, Wes. Very appreciated. If you would like to support this podcast, which is 100% listeners supported, there are no sponsors, there's no advertisers, there's no group funding any of this. This is just me doing this. And of course, this does cost me time. It does cost me money. So if you would like to support this, it's very easy. Stop by my personal webpage, martinball.net. Use the PayPal link at the top right of the page, or you can link over to my Patreon page from there, which is patreon.com/martinwball. And I have monthly contribution levels everywhere from $1 a month up to $100 a month, with increasing benefits and access all along the way, as I mentioned, every week. And just a continued ongoing support to everyone over there at Patreon who has signed up at whatever level is comfortable for them and whatever access they would like. And for the people who have been there and have had to leave, also thank you very much for your support. Really appreciate it. Let's see. Anything else to mention? I think that's it at the moment. Let's go ahead and get into our conversation with James, though. Actually, I will remind you, I'm available for 30, 60, and 90-minute consultations to help you integrate your entheogenic experience, to help navigate your 5-MeO non-dual opening or whatever else you'd like to talk about. I'm here to help. You can reach out at martinwball@gmail.com or stop by at nondualentheogenicintegration.com if you want more details. And I look forward to speaking with you. Of course, next week we'll have the next selection from the Entheological Paradigm 2021 edition. Of course, all of my audiobooks are available over at audible.com, at Amazon, at the iBook store, and of course there's also paperback and ebook editions of my books available as well. And for those of you who continue to buy and read my books or listen to them, thank you very much. Hope you're enjoying them, and look forward to bringing you more in the future. Okay, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with James Lanthier from Mindset Pharma. You can look them up online at mindsetpharma.com. Here we go. And of course, I will throw in a little new music at the end of our conversation. And of course, you can find my music, well, anywhere there's music online, but you can go to my Bandcamp page at martinball.bandcamp.com if you want more of my music. Okay, here we go. Well, great. It's great to meet you today, James. Sorry that we couldn't connect last week. That was kind of an off day for me, I'll tell you. But it's great to have you here today.
Great to be here as well. And great to meet you.
Yeah. So James, the last name, is it Lanthier?
Well, I pronounce it Lanthier, which gets it closer to the French pronunciation, but is not the sort of double-barreled Quebecois version.
All right. So you're in Toronto, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Feels like I'm interviewing a lot of you guys from Canada working on psychedelic medicine development these days.
Yeah, definitely a real, nexus um, of some of the more recent companies, at least to Toronto and to Canada for sure. I'm not surprised to hear that.
Yeah, it seems like it's quite the hotbed of development. And I know that the legal apparatus is very different in Canada than it is in the United States. So I think that it's allowing for more flexibility. But we can talk all about that, and we can talk about your company mindset and all the things you guys are working on. But I always like to start with just getting to know the person that I'm speaking to here on the podcast. So I would invite you, James, to tell us a little bit about yourself. And of course, it's always of interest of how people got into this space, whether
Sure.
they are facilitating psychedelic experiences or developing um, medical protocols or whatever it is. It's always interesting to find out what got you involved with this. So
Yeah.
let's start with you if you don't mind.
Okay. Sure. So I'm based. I'm a Canadian. I'm based in Toronto. I've mainly lived here. Um, my my career, I've spent most of it developing growth businesses, and a lot of those via the public markets in Canada, which are a bit different than the public markets in the US. They tend to be more supportive of earlier stage businesses. So a lot of the sort of traditionally a lot of the kind of risk capital, venture capital, a lot of that has gotten in Canada deployed through the public market. So you have companies go public in Canada that wouldn't otherwise be public in other places, especially the US. And I I'd always been really interested in psychedelic drugs and what they were capable of. And I'm not a life science person, but most of the businesses I'd worked at were you call them sort of technology enabled businesses. And the last business that I was working at before Mindset was a business that applied machine learning to human fertility, and it was a really fascinating business with a whole lot of potential, I thought. But some friends, a friend of mine who had gotten involved really founding Mindset and as kind of a seed investor, approached me about Mindset, and I was really, really intrigued. And what really sold me on getting involved, though, was meeting the sort of the scientific founding team, mm-hmm. and getting to kind of really understand, their vision for the role that a company like Mindset could play in the development of the medical psychedelic space. So I jumped in, and that was in early 2020. But I'd been I was interested. I was so interested that I think if the pitch had been that Mindset was developing psychedelic umbrellas or psychedelic patio furniture, I still been interested. But the fact that they had these really smart scientists whose background fit perfectly with what they were trying to do, and where there also, it seemed like, was this big opportunity. And so I was sold.
Mm. And
Mm-hmm.
well, just why is that? What caught your interest about it? And I mean, I know you just said if they were selling like psychedelic furniture, but why is that a passion and interest for you?
Well, I think that forget about even what's this big commercial opportunity and all of this commercial development that's happened in the last few years. I think any thinking person should find the topic of psychedelic drugs intriguing because of this I'll probably lack the words here, but like this window of altered perception that they open, and kind of the questions about consciousness that they raise for anybody who who tries them.
Mm-hmm. So in sort of jumping into this arena, I think that we're definitely living in a very different era right now. But we kind of mentioned briefly that formerly I was teaching at Southern Oregon University, and I taught there for about 10 years until I got laid off from the enrollment issue. But something that I would often talk about on my classes with students is the role of psychedelics in traditional religion. And it's interesting that kind of over the years, early on, it's something that would always elicit giggles from students. Like you mentioned psychedelics, and like, they're a little nervous, and they're like, I don't know what this has to do with religion. But I think students in general today, they're a bit more informed about the role that these substances have played within cultures. And so, it's been a couple of years since I've been at the university now, but it seemed like the giggles were a little bit less. But I would imagine that it's maybe even more so in the business world, mentioning the word psychedelic, that maybe some people still have what do you mean? Why are you in this business? And I'm just curious sort of what you feel the perception is of saying I am developing a psychedelic business, how people react to that.
Well, I think perceptions are changing really, really, really quickly around psychedelic drugs, and I think that the giggles are quieting down for a lot of people there, but just because of all of the media coverage around the potential utility of the drugs in treating mental illness, and how much media coverage and awareness there's been of sort of the mental health crisis, and everybody who's gone through the last few years in the pandemic. I think it's just reinforced everyone's kind of common understanding that for a whole lot of people, maybe even most people, your mental health is closer to the bone than maybe you'd like to think it is. So yeah, there's been a big change. When I tell people what I'm doing, in early 2020, I would definitely get some startled, semi-startled reactions. But now, like, my test case is like my wife's aunt, who's otherwise like quite a cautious, a fairly cautious person in her personal life. Now talks about how she wishes that she had tried them when she was younger, is interested in trying them now, like, and this is not a person who lives anything remotely close to what you could consider like a partying lifestyle, is not a drinker, like is a pretty fairly cautious conservative person. So it's a sample size of one, but I think that's fair. Like, a lot of there's just in my conversations, and I would be curious to hear what you think, but I find people are just a lot more open to this now than they were 2 years ago.
Yeah, I would agree. There does seem to be a more general interest that is developing As you mentioned, that over the past couple of years now, it's been really challenging for a lot of people on a variety of levels, from political situations to,
Yep.
healthcare situation, of course, coronavirus, and the isolation, and just it's sort of accented many of the struggles that people are going through. And so I do think that there's a more general interest now in alternate ways of treating and dealing with these things other than being on a psychiatric medication for the rest of your life or something like that. And it's curious. You're in Toronto, that it was the one place that I had the most hostile interview I've ever personally had for myself. That there's a fellow who runs a radio program there out of Toronto, and it's called like
Mm.
X Factor or X Zone or something like that. And this guy interviewed me, I think it was back in 2015. So, we're going a few years back now.
Yeah.
And he had me on his show, and he was so hostile. And back then we were talking about how there were programs being developed to give MDMA to
Yep.
vets and people with PTSD. And his attitude was, oh, they're just a bunch of softies. And, you know, anybody who takes any kind of drug, they're a criminal. They should be in prison. And I don't care if it helps anyone. I don't care if it
Mm.
relieves anything. And he was so negative. And he actually even cut off my mic in the middle of the interview. And
Wow.
yeah, and that was out of Toronto. So not to speak bad about Toronto or anything, but
Oh,
that it was
that's
it was
pretty
surprising.
extreme.
It was extreme, because especially because he invited me to be on the interview, but it seemed like he
Yeah.
just wanted somebody to yell at. But it sounds like the culture is a little bit different in Toronto these days, and maybe people who weren't aware of the potentials, maybe they're coming around, as you say, with this relative who is now curious. And this is something that I actually do see a lot of people who have, we would call them mainstream folks, who never had an interest in, quote, taking drugs or for recreation or something like that, but they
Yeah.
now are interested because they've been hearing about that there's a lot more information about the potential for therapeutic applications of psychedelics. And so people are becoming very curious, I think.
Yeah, and I think with when it comes to Toronto specifically, right? And this is one of the reasons why you've probably spoken to other business folks who are from Toronto, have a connection to Toronto, is really the what happened here with cannabis, where Canada kind of led the way with the adult rec market adoption of cannabis. And so, there were a lot of business people who rode that wave. I think a lot of so that meant that there was a sort of an investor base here in Canada who were really kind of looking for the next thing. And it seems like psychedelics and psilocybin in particular, could be the next thing at a 80,000 foot level. This looked similar enough of, okay, it's plant medicine and formerly illegal substance now moving through, their pathway to becoming legal. Obviously, there's also huge differences, and I don't think those differences were totally identified at the beginning. But that's commercially probably why. But Toronto, historically was a city and a culture that was very quite conservative. Everything's closed on Sundays. You have to, in Ontario, you buy your beer and liquor from the government, essentially. Pretty restrictive when it comes to anything sort of, or it used to be pretty restrictive when it came to anything, um, you know, for lack of a better term, kind of like sin based. But now in the last, few years with what's happened with cannabis, there are, you can't walk half a block in Toronto without, tripping over a cannabis store. So, and that's all been since 2015. So I think that's probably changed, how a lot of people think about drugs in general. And yeah, so I would guess you might get a different reception now from your old radio, your old interview.
Maybe, actually, the guy invited me back. I think it was just last year. I got an email from his team saying, we'd like to invite you back. And I wrote them a message saying, it's like, I would just like a little clarification before I actually come back on your show, because last time I was on, your dude cut off my mic and yelled at me. And it was like the most hostile interview I've ever had. So I want to know, why do you want to have me back? And then they never even responded to that email, which I thought was very unprofessional. But anyway,
yes.
Yeah, I do think that cannabis has helped sort of change the landscape and change people's perceptions. And also, I'm here in Oregon, the Northwest coast of the United States, and we are quite progressive here in terms of our approach. And we even have a psilocybin program that's coming online right now. And we've also taken steps to decriminalize virtually all drugs in Oregon and supplant that with rather than prisons, healthcare access. There's actually a lot of criticisms around that program that it doesn't seem to actually be working, that in the sense that state funds are supposed to help funnel people into healthcare and addiction treatment rather than prisons. And apparently not a lot of people are actually taking advantage of that. So it seems like the program on the ground has some issues. And our psilocybin program is still coming online in 23, and so it's still in the development phase right now. But we also are getting ketamine clinics are starting to open up in Oregon. We have one that recently opened up here in Ashland, Oregon. So things are definitely shifting. And I was actually quite surprised when a couple of years ago I went up to Oregon Health and Science University for my own personal medical issue, and the doctor who consulted with me obviously doesn't know anything about me, and asked around my condition, said, well, have you considered psychedelic therapy?
Really?
Yeah. And I thought that was pretty interesting. I was like, well, believe me, yeah, I've tried. But that's, Oregon Health and Science University. That's the main, that's the biggest healthcare provider here in Oregon. And, so that really shows a shift in public perception and public awareness and interest in these things, where, from this premier medical institute in Oregon is actually personally suggesting that to me as a form of therapy.
It does. Well, it's really going to be interesting to watch. I mean, I'm sure, like you said, there's going to be growing pains, and they'll have to make some, adaptations based on the experience. But all of those changes in Oregon will be really interesting to see how they play out over the next few years, and what what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. So let's talk just a little bit about being a CEO. And, every once in a while I get to talk to CEOs. I myself, I'm not a business person. I'm actually, I probably could say I'm a pretty good failure as a business person. I'm not a good business person. I don't make a large income or anything like that. I've never been like financially successful or have to deal with or even entry into the big world of finance and companies and official roles and things like that. I'm just this independent guy who writes some books and has a podcast. But what does it mean to be a CEO of a company like this? I'm just kind of curious, like, how would you describe your role as the CEO? What do you do?
Well, you end up doing a bunch of different things. So it's a very different job than it would be, being the CEO of, let's say, a private, mature, operating business. So in this case, this is what we're doing is pretty specialized, preclinical drug development and discovery. And, that's not what my, background is in. So I'm not not intimately involved in, directing the work. But what I would, every business needs someone to make decisions, around that involve like some business judgment. And in an early stage company, it's not, always, well, a company of like any size or scale, it's not always 100% clear what you should do. And so I think at like its most basic level, the job of the CEO, and and a lot of what I spend my time doing is helping the organization, helping the people really prioritize, like, what is it that we're going to be, we have a finite amount of time and a finite number of resources, and so, like, what are we going to spend our time focused on doing? And it's also very hard to do more than one or a couple of things well. So, like, where do we focus? And then as decisions and jump balls come up, okay, like, you need to make decisions, because you need continual, an attempt at sort of continual forward momentum, especially in an early stage company. So that's a lot of what I spend my time doing. The other part of it is because it's a public company, you're constantly talking about the business, and because you're the reality is that you want to get people interested in what you're doing. In this case, I've been the CEO of a public company before, and it was a games business, and the reality is, that business was kind of fairly flat, and it was hard to kind of construct a narrative around it. But this one it's, at least to me, and at least to enough people, it's what the larger kind of mission of psychedelic medicine, and then what Mindset is doing within it, are really I think really interesting. So it's really, even if you end up telling the sort of a similar story over and over again, I don't find myself getting tired of it.
Okay.
So that's great. A good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what Mindset is doing. I've got your website up here. So for anybody who wants to look online, it's mindsetpharma.com. And we've got your company overview. You've got a section on pipeline, recent news. We've got links to our science. We've got links for investors. But let's talk about what it is that you guys are working on developing. So just scrolling down the page here, where it says the pipeline, you have lists 4 different families. So we have family 1 that says psilocybin-like conjugate, family 2, high potency, short acting psilocybin-like, family 3, low potency, long duration for microdosing, and family 4, this is the one I'm particularly interested in, is DMT, 5-MeO DMT inspired compounds. So let's talk a little bit about, so what are we talking about, these psilocybin-like conjugates, 5-MeO DMT inspired compounds? So tell us a little bit about what that means, and what is the I guess sort of what's the rationale behind it? What is it that you're looking to develop that's different here?
Yeah. So the original concept of Mindset, which we have really stuck to and just expanded, is that there really was an opportunity to try to, because of how strong the prohibitions on psychedelic drugs were in North America, that there was an opportunity, as what we'd call first generation drugs make their way through the FDA. So psilocybin and MDMA make their way through the FDA, that is an opportunity to try to create newer drugs that would hopefully be better than the first generation drugs, and would also because they were new drugs, be patentable in a way that the first generation drugs are not. And that if we could do both those things, i.e. create drugs that were, new and also hopefully better than the first generation drugs in some way, shape, or form, then we'd have created something that was valuable, because ultimately larger pharma organizations would move into the medical psychedelic space and would be interested in taking drugs to market that ticked both those boxes. And the hypothesis was that they wouldn't be so interested in working with psilocybin or with formulation of psilocybin, because very difficult to get really strong intellectual property rights around that. And there's lots of drug companies out there that specialize in generic drugs, but real big pharma wants to start with drugs where they are novel and enjoy really strong IP rights. So that was the original sort of business vision for Mindset. And we started off working with drugs that were really based on the psilocybin chemical backbone. And we knew that there were different issues associated with psilocybin where, if you could, work around them or solve them, you'd create something that would be valuable. So, even back in 2019, 2020, the duration of a psilocybin trip was, perceived to potentially be something that could be an impediment to its adoption. So if you could make a drug that did the same thing for people, but just did it in less time, then that would be something that could be interesting or valuable to patients at the end of the day. And so we started with psilocybin, and we, to be honest, what we did is really just apply a range of different drug design strategies that commonly get applied to, known molecules to try to create novelty. And we didn't know what we were going to create. We went through a really, and we're still going through it, a really comprehensive, testing and screening process where we've designed molecules, we take them to a lab to try to synthesize them. And then we test them first in dishes to see how they react in different cellular tests. And then we take the most promising ones and run them through a cascade of different mouse and rat tests to try to further figure out where the differentiation potentially lies. And so we started with drugs that were going to be like psilocybin, and out of that work we really identified these three different families that you mentioned, and then moved on and tried to take some of the strategies that we used that were the more successful strategies with those first three families, and applied them to both the DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. And all of this work is still ongoing. So we're still in the preclinical stages for all of our drug development, but we're continually adding. So we talk publicly about 4 families. We're hopefully soon going to be talking about a lot more than that, because our scientific team keeps identifying different ways to create not only novelty but differentiation. In our view, just novelty alone really isn't going to be enough, because the first, psilocybin does a pretty good job. And like you mentioned, with your anecdote, I think that perception is making its way through the ranks of psychiatrists. And so just creating a psilocybin that is, somehow patentable because you've changed the structure, in our view, isn't really going to be, enough, because psilocybin, hopefully, in the not too distant future, will be, available in the market, and you have to actually create something that is, more useful to people in one way, shape, or form, and that's really what we're trying to do.
Yeah, so I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, and one of the wings of the psychedelic movement is the whole legalized nature side, which has been pretty active here on the West Coast of the United States. And this idea of any quote unquote earth medicine should be decriminalized, or actually, so actually it's decriminalized nature. It's not legalized nature, but decriminalized nature. This idea that if it comes from nature, it should not be criminalized in any way. And there's kind of a strong contingency within the psychedelic movement, at least in the United States and probably elsewhere as well. This idea of nature's good, pharmaceuticals are bad, chemical companies are bad, mainstream medicine is bad. This is not a view that I personally share, but it's pretty prominent. And actually, even here in Oregon, a lot of the folks who were involved with the decriminalization movement were opposed to the psilocybin initiative. That they didn't want the psilocybin initiative to go through because they don't want it to be medicalized. But a common refrain that is made is, well, you can't improve upon nature. But you're saying, well, maybe there are ways that we can improve upon it. And so one of the things that you mentioned was psilocybin, that a possible drawback to it is that it's not the longest lasting psychedelic, but it is fairly long. It's a big commitment. That it's at least minimum of 5 to 6 hours of experience. Then you have preparation time, and then you have integration and downtime afterwards. And so in terms of like clinics, like this is one of these issues that's coming up here in Oregon. So if clinics are going to be offering psilocybin, you really can only treat a small number of people on any given day. And so that actually increases the cost of access, because if you have fewer patients or fewer clients that you're working with, you need to raise the prices in order to take care of overhead and staff and all of that. So when you're talking about improving psilocybin, it seems that one of these issues is, well, maybe we could get something that's shorter acting that also has some of the same properties. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that in terms of what are the perceived, or at least the goals for, we are improving this. So what does that mean to make an improvement, or to be offering something that is similar yet different and also effective?
Yeah, and I will, at the risk of, this may sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I'm not, because I will back up to say that, we're really just at the, as long as it might feel like, the work of some of these organizations has been going, really, we're just at the early stages of actual, clinical study takes a long time of any drug, right? So when we talk to psychiatrists about psilocybin, increasingly the viewpoint that we get is, I think at a high level, it's great. It's settled. Psilocybin has a benefit. They're aware of the research. They like the reaction is like the physician you were talking about, psilocybin needs to be an option for people. The other thing that we hear from psychiatrists who have spent at least some time researching it is, oh, geez, but it's really, that's really long. We got to figure out a shorter way to get, they're also, their practice is their business and their livelihood, and they're thinking of just how long it will take to have people, and the infrastructure it's required to have people, in a clinic for whatever that amount of time is, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever. And they're what they keep saying to us is you've got to figure out a way to, cut that down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't like, there's going to have to be a whole new set of studies to figure out whether, and for which indications, a shorter psilocybin, if we're successful in creating one, does it work as well as regular psilocybin? But that is one of the things one of the factors we've identified in some of the drugs that we've been able to create, and everything that we're working on, these are chemicals that didn't exist before. So your point about the decrypt, the natural product perspective, I think that's a very understandable reaction. And psychedelic mushrooms are so amazing and powerful, and I understand anything associated with pharma, especially for some people, carries a big stigma, and for at least a certain percentage of those people, you're probably going to have a hard time ever convincing them otherwise. But I think if you kind of look at what there's a sort of natural arc to pharma taking natural products and creating synthetic versions, altered synthetic versions, ultimately a new product that that works better for people. So the example we always use is you take the bark of the willow tree, which was known for thousands of years to be a powerful painkiller, which you typically make a tea from the bark, but the tea might kill your pain, but you'd also get quite sick and vomit. And it took the German chemists in the 19th century really a good 60, 70 years of going through a number of different synthetic intermediate chemicals to go from the bark of the willow tree to ultimately to aspirin, which was the sort of gold standard painkiller for probably 100 years. That's what we sort of compare what we're trying to do. Psilocybin or synthetic, psychedelic mushrooms don't have nearly the same adverse effects as the bark of the willow tree does. But I think that's a good example because it does demonstrate you can make something based on the natural product as a jumping off point that actually does do a better job than the natural product, and that's really what we're trying to do. And
yeah, I mean, just one example that I personally have is I started in the world of psychedelics with psilocybin mushrooms, but something I've said over the years was psilocybin mushrooms would be perfect if they didn't give me gas, but they do. They give me gas,
yeah,
and
sure.
I know they give a lot of people gas, and
yeah,
that can be uncomfortable on particularly for me on the backside of the experience. There's a lot of gas kind of coming out both ways, and there's a lot of flavor and a lot of taste. And then I was introduced to 4-ACO DMT, which is a purely synthetic tryptamine molecule that for me seems fairly indistinguishable from psilocybin mushrooms. And the bonus, there's no gas or digestional issues that take place with it. So for me, I was really happy to find 4-ACO DMT. It's like, great, there's a little molecule, you can take it, it's very easy.
Yeah.
feels like psilocybin to me, but
Yeah.
I don't get all the digestive stuff and all the gas stuff, which I know some people don't mind. But if you're in a room with a bunch of people eating mushrooms, it can get a little stinky, honestly.
Sure.
Which again, I love psilocybin. I love psilocybin mushrooms. So I'm not trying to say it's not an aversion to it, but it's just, well, there is a synthetic alternative that has very similar action. So I'm interested in things like that.
Well, and I think in the case of psilocybin mushrooms, there's you're trying to make something. We're trying to make something that is going to be a medicine that's going to be palatable to like a wide range of different people. Suffering from a mood disorder, probably something along the depression spectrum. And it's one thing to, yeah, there's going to be a group of people who are going to feel very passionately for, reasons that I empathize with about wanting a natural product. I think there's a larger group of people who would be right in that patient group who will have the opposite view, which is that they won't want to consume a crumbly foreign natural product. They're going to want to consume something that it looks and feels a lot more like medicine. And that's just, I think that's just the reality of things. It will take a whole lot more work to get more people to be comfortable, consuming a mushroom than necessarily than a pill or in something that they inhale in a clinical setting. I think, and not to mention the bigger issue of with it is really hard to control dosing with a natural product.
Yeah.
And that in a natural, and you're there may be advancements in biosynthetic engineering that get us there eventually, but to my knowledge we're not there yet, and you're going to have a really hard time convincing a health regulator to approve the use of a drug where you can't control the dosing of the active pharmaceutical ingredient. And for that reason alone, the synthetic version is probably always going to come out on top.
Yeah. And I think that that's a very kind of interesting complication with what is taking place with the psilocybin initiative here in Oregon, that it is only psilocybin mushrooms. And I think that the governing board that is developing the program has decided that it's only going to be one specific species of psilocybin mushrooms, which of course there are multiple different species of psilocybin mushrooms around the world. But in order to have some kind of consistency, they're saying, no, it's only going to be this one kind of mushroom. But even then, there's a huge amount of variability that, in my own experience, sometimes 1 gram of one batch of mushrooms is way stronger than 3.5 grams in another batch of mushrooms. So as you say, there's a huge amount of variability there. And I think ideally what I'd like to see in terms of the development of both the pharmaceutical side and the decriminalization side is that in order to satisfy everyone, I think that we need some form of legal equity, in the sense that if you want to take psilocybin mushrooms or you want to have a psilocybin mushroom ceremony, that is a protected right. If you want to go to a psychiatrist and take a pharmaceutical, that is also a protected legal healthcare right. If you want to participate in a psilocybin church, that is also a protected right. That we need to not just open the door just in one area, but really across the board, so that these different communities that want to have access and not want to be afraid of going to prison that we need to make these reforms kind of across the board. And as long as there's room for everyone and everyone feels that they have access to what they feel is their right, then I think that that's probably the most equitable solution.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think it doesn't logically reflect, it isn't, you know, it doesn't reflect well on kind of either side for them to take positions that, well, the other, you know, my way, either the synthetic way or the natural product way, you know, has to prevail at the exclusion of the other one. It should be that there is room really for, you know, for both, and definitely that would be, you know, that would be my hope, is that that's, you know, what the future looks a lot more like, because there's really no reason that you shouldn't be able to have both.
Yeah. And I think that if we take it from the broader perspective of compassion for other human beings, that the idea that, look, developing pharmaceutical products that have psychedelic action can probably reach a larger audience, can reach a larger clientele base, and actually help more people in the long run. Just from that compassionate perspective, I think that it's worthwhile to develop it, because it's helping people. And if that's what we're really concerned about, is helping
Yes.
people, then why not pursue all these different avenues? Now, something I wanted to ask you about, it doesn't seem like this is what's happening with Mindset, but I know that there are some companies, or at least there's some researchers out there that are looking at this question of, can we get the benefits of psychedelic drugs without having a psychedelic experience? And this is a place where there seems to be a lot of kind of hot button issues. And particularly, you know, one of the things that's held out is the psilocybin studies that were done at Johns Hopkins University pretty much identified that it was the mystical component of the
Yep.
psilocybin experience that seems to have the greatest therapeutic potential. And so
Yep.
when we have people talking about, well, if we can take the psychedelic experience out of this psychedelic, then it raises the question of, well, what would be the value? So how does Mindset see this particular kind of issue?
Well, you know, I understand why there's groups who'd want to work on that, and I think the um, you know, for Mindset, like, we are looking at a class of draft, what we call our family three, which are again, you know, structurally similar to psilocybin, but where we see a lower effect size. So we're in terms of like a lower serotonin receptor activity, and you know, I think the you know, there is a lot less clinical evidence around microdosing, but you know, one of our members of our scientific advisory board, Guy Higgins, was a co-author on a paper where they measured the impact of a low dose psilocybin regimen on you know, rats with low motivation, and they did see, you know, an improvement in the motivation of the rats. So now, you know, you're talking about is a little bit different, just trying to taking out the psychedelic effect, you know, completely. It's hard for me to see how that's going to, you know, help, because it does, you know, all the data seems to suggest that you need for things like, you know, depression, major depressive disorder, treatment resistant depression, you do need this kind of I'm not even sure rewiring is the right word, but you do need this, like, this break in your ruminative, you know, thought processes that you're being, you know, trapped in. And so I will be really surprised if some of the if it turns out that that there's some other biological activity that you can still retain without while getting rid of the psychedelic experience, and that still is good enough to help lift people out of their depressive circumstances. But I think that there will be room for drugs that still deliver. I've been encouraged by this paper, and I think that there could be a room for a sub-hallucinogenic kind of microdosing style drug that doesn't evoke in you a psychedelic experience, but is still hitting those same receptors. So again, back to what I said before, like, we're still really in the early stages of this renaissance, if you want to call it that, where I think there's going to be a lot more interesting work to get to. There's a lot more interesting work that needs to be done, and some of it's happening, and more of it needs to happen to really figure out what are the right parameters for different different indications, and what are the right characteristics. So it might be that it might be more personalized. It might be that some people do need the full psychedelic trip in order to respond, and it might be that others don't. But either way, there's kind of a lot more work that needs to happen to really get to more precise answers to those questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting because we kind of are at the beginning of all of this, and I'm a big fan of science, and I think scientific investigation is definitely worthy of pursuit. And if we can find some novel properties, I'm all for it. So something I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about, because this is, in my favorite wheelhouse is 5-MeO DMT, and that's one of the things that's on your website about what you guys are developing. And one of the things that I think is fascinating about 5-MeO DMT is that it is, in my opinion, it's the most reliable entry into a mystical state or a unitary state. And it also is relatively short acting. So it already has a lot of the properties that we're looking for, in the sense of, well, if it's the mystical experience that has the most therapeutic potential, then 5-MeO is a really good candidate for that. And also, it is all complete within an hour versus psilocybin, which is many, many hours. And so it seems to have a profile that could fit really well. But there also is the issue that 5-MeO DMT is incredibly powerful. And so that in some instances, the experience itself can be traumatic for people. So how is Mindset working on something in the 5-MeO DMT realm? And I think, again, on your website, this is in the family 4 DMT and 5-MeO DMT inspired compounds. So I'm kind of curious about what you guys are developing or looking at there, and what are some of the parameters that you're hoping to improve on?
Yeah, so we're interested in it for exactly the reasons that you outlined. Really profound. The reports are a really profound trip and a short duration, and I think that's one of the reasons why it is one of the families that actually working with a much larger pharmaceutical company on in partnership. It's one of the things that drew them to us is we're working on both family 2 with them, which are our really sort of shorter acting psilocybin analogs, as well as family 4, which are the DMT and 5-MeO DMT analogs. So we're not trying to make it shorter. We're but the variable that we are interested in is safety. So when we've profiled when we've looked at 5-MeO DMT in rodents, we see a lot of different signs of serotonin syndrome. So serotonin syndrome, is something side effect more commonly associated with antidepressants, SSRIs, where something is amiss, and you wind up with too much serotonin in your body, and it's kind of like a laundry list of different, unpleasant symptoms that might range from, a headache to nausea, and like, feel, occasionally can actually be like quite serious to the point of being fatal. And there are, in the literature around 5-MeO-DMT, it is not, it doesn't seem like it is as quite as safe a drug as psilocybin. It is a bit more toxic. And so that's really what we're trying to do with our family 4, is to try to create drugs that at least physically are going to be safer. There is a lot of interest in this class of drugs for exactly, again, the reasons you outlined. So there's lots of groups who are a number of groups who are now studying 5-MeO-DMT and DMT clinically. And it's going to be really interesting to see, how that data shakes out. For Mindset, really with the other 3 families, we're trying to piggyback off of the success of psilocybin. I'm optimistic that DMT and 5-MeO in particular will be helpful to people, really because of how profound the trip is reported to be. But that class of drugs, as is like not clinically as far along. So it'll be really interesting.
Yeah. So I've kept you for an hour. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I was hoping we could just talk a little bit about sort of the movement from rats to clinical trials with people, because you've discussed how well we can give it to rats and we can see some results, but eventually we do need to get to human trials and then get their reports on what they're experiencing. So how far along are you guys in that process? And then when it is with human clinical trials, what are some of the things that you're going to be looking for in terms of results and data?
Yeah, great question. So with a couple of our families, with our family 1 and our family 2, we should be in human trials next year. I think human trials for family 4 would be a bit further behind, so probably the following year. And we're, as far as what we're looking for, to improve on clinically, we're still working on that. Mindset. The other thing with Mindset is that, like I said, we thought there was kind of this really one-time opportunity to try to create this, psychedelic drug discovery business. But what our scientific team is really good at is the early stage discovery work. Our whole model is to partner with other groups that have the expertise in running clinical trials, as well as, are just closer to treating patients. And so they have the actual ideas around what it is that they want to treat. I mean, we know at a high level, psilocybin seems to work for, we know it works. We're pretty sure it works for, a bunch of different types of depression. And there's at least some preliminary evidence that it works for, a whole range of other kind of, related neuropsychiatric indications. But we try to stick with what we know the scientific team is really good at, which is the discovery, and then partner with other groups that have a clinical focus.
Okay. So at this point, if people want to become involved either as investors or down the road be participants in clinical trials, is that something that's available to people?
At this point, we haven't. That could become available joining a trial at some point. We're not there. We're not there yet. If anybody's interested in chatting about Mindset, we put our emails read on every press release, and we're more than happy to talk to anybody. And love chatting with people about the space, not only just Mindset. So don't hesitate to reach out, please.
Great. And again, the website is Mindset Pharma.com. Is there anything else that you feel you'd like to cover before I let you go, or?
It's been a great conversation, and I really appreciate being on. No, I think I'm sure we could keep going, but
Yeah.
this is probably good for now.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I let interviews run into, 2 hours long, but you're a CEO, you've got stuff to do. So, I want to let you get back to your day, but thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks,
Yeah, I
Martin.
really appreciate speaking with you, James. And please feel free to stay in touch as things develop with mindset. And if there's anything I can do over here at the Entheogenic Evolution to help out, just let me know.
Thank you so much. It sounds great.
Okay.